Hello, Ben.
Hello, Chezi.
How has your week been going?
It's been going well.
I realized I said last week I ended with "I'll see you next week," but really, it's the
But it
same.
really was
Correct.
this week.
But Shabbat is in the air. That's
hmm
it. Wednesday's over. Thursday's here. Very, very
Yeah,
excited.
Thursday is where I can start feeling it a little bit more. I put a little bit of music to prepare.
There you go. I like it. So we started the 8th chapter, and we're the last chapter, and my mind is really getting into the whole idea of free will, choice. We spoke about that was moving off from prophecy, and this is we're going to continue out through this whole chapter. I did want to just go back for a second in general about like this, and what we're going to read about soon is my mind is really facing this this paradox, right, between if God knows everything, right, how can humans have free will? Ultimately, that's the question he's asking. And of course, he goes. We read before, and we'll read soon how what's the point of the commandments? Obviously, if there's no real free will, and his sort of solution ultimately is going to be that God's knowledge and human will and human free will they both exist. Right, even if this seems contradictory to us, right? Because like clearly the human understanding, and this is what he talks about, how we're limited, even when it came to even Moses himself is limited, right? That we can't understand like a divine truth, right? It ultimately transcends our logic, right? So even if we're saying God's knowledge, there's a contradiction between free will and God's knowledge. We don't even know what God's knowledge means for us to know if there's a contradiction between God's knowledge and free will, right? We don't understand what that concept of God's knowledge even means. So, that's obviously, we can't be thinking about that. And we could see this in a certain sense with the idea of, is light a particle or is it a wave, right? And then we're like, no, it's both. And even though it's very hard for us to sort of understand that concept, yet it's still true that both of them are true. And I wouldn't say Rav Kook is doing this alongside the Rambam, but both of them are obviously talk about how the human language is clearly not enough. And this is why Rambam has his, his derech hashlila, right? The negative way of sort of looking what God isn't ultimately. And Rav Kook has an interesting idea how, well, before I even go there, just even if you're talking to someone that is like a heretic, and the question of God exists or doesn't exist is also like a silly question, right? Because exist or doesn't exist, right, with regards to God are, they're inadequate terms. And even if someone is sort of intuitively, if you go and say something about God, when someone's reaction, there's like a knee-jerk reaction to say that already what you're saying doesn't make sense, because you're bringing God into the sentence, right? So like sometimes like the negative reaction isn't necessarily because someone is saying that God doesn't exist, is rather saying like the thing you're saying is automatically wrong because you're already adding God into this concept. Now, Rav Kook talks about how a heresy, kfirah, ultimately is not necessarily a negative thing. Rather, it's there to allow for the mind to refine itself in understanding God. Right, as the Gemara says, the Talmud says, he who rejects idolatry is called a Jew. Right, so the sense is that like having a heresy for the man in the sky or for Zeus or for all those ideas, that is actually that's a feature, not a bug. You want to think critically about these things and challenge these things because they allow you to create a more abstract picture in your mind. But the more abstract it becomes, the truer it gets closer to being true.
So the heresy. So he's saying that there's
to clarify, Rav Kook,
function to heresy in the sense
sorry?
that it allows you to step out of your frame when you're looking at something like Zeus or something like that.
Yeah, correct. You want to challenge. You're hearing like, oh, and God was saying God was angry. So there's a sense where you want the reaction to be like, but God, using that term is wrong. And like, it's silly to think of a God like an angry man in the sky. And Rambam would affirm that and say, correct. Like, it's wrong to think that because there isn't an angry man in the sky. Nevertheless, that is the discussion that, let's say you could say fundamentalists believe, or there are people that have that understanding. And Rambam saying that in those circles, people will call like not believing that it happened in 6 days necessarily is considered heresy.
Right.
So Rav Kook would come and say like, no, challenging that belief in a certain sense is actually refining your relationship with God, because it's allowing you to say like, it can't be just that. It can't just be, that's not what it means.
Interesting. Yeah.
But there's a pasuk in Tehillim and Proverbs that King David says, Lecha dumiyat tehillah. I'm sure you've heard that thing before, but it's to you, right? This is God, right? Silence is praise, ultimately. And the idea is that when you're talking about these things, these kind of concepts, really, ideally, just be silent, because you can't really fully understand these concepts. And, so praising God is being humble and knowing your place when discussing these things, while we're, of course, are learning and discussing these things. But I just thought it's important to mention, considering last class. But we'll continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
אבל הפתגם שמצאנו לחכמים באומרם, הכל בידי שמיים חוץ מיראת שמיים, הרי נכון הוא במכוון למה שזכרנו. אולם הרבה טועים וחושבים על כמה מעשי האדם הבכיריים שהם הכרחיים לו, כזיווג פלונית, או היות ממון זה בידו, וזה בלתי נכון. אדם זה שגזל ממון פלוני, או גנבו, או בגד בו וכחש לו ונשבע לו על ממונו, אם אמרנו שאלוהים גזר על זה שיגיע זה לידו, ושיצא מידו של אללה, הרי שגזר על העבירה, והרי הדבר כן. ואין הדבר כן, אלא שבכל מעשי האדם הבכירים, והם נמצאים בלא ספק הציות והמרי. כי כבר ביררנו בפרק השני, שהעשין והלווין שבתורה, שהעשין והלווין, שהעשה והלו, ולא תעשה, אינם אלא במעשים שיש לאדם, והם בחירה לעשותם, או שלא לעשותם. ובחלק זה שבנפש מקומה של יראת שמיים, ואינה בידי שמיים, כי היא מסורה לבחירת האדם, כמו שביארנו, ומה שאמרו הכל בידי שמיים. לא אמרו זה אלא על הדברים הטבעיים, שאין לאדם בחירה בהם, כגון שיהיה ארוך או קצר, או רעידת הגשמים, או עצירתם, או קלקול האוויר, או צחותו, וכיוצא בזה, וכל מה שבעולם, אך לא על תנועות האדם ומנוחותיו.
Okay, so he's kind of clarifying, connecting the things that he's discussed. Okay.
All right.
The statement found in the sayings of the rabbis, all is in the power of God except the fear of God.
Or reverence of God.
All is in the power except the fear of God or reverence of God is nevertheless true and in accord with what we have laid down here. Men are, however, very often prone to err in supposing that many of their actions in reality are the result of their own free will, are forced upon them. As for instance, so let's read this again. Men are very often prone to err in supposing that many of their actions, in reality, the result of their own free will, are forced upon them. As for instance, marrying a certain woman or acquiring a certain amount of money. Such a supposition is untrue. If a man espouses and marry a woman legally, then she becomes his lawful wife. And by his marrying her, he has fulfilled the divine command to increase and multiply. God, however, does not decree the fulfillment of a commandment. If, on the other hand, a man has consummated with a woman in an unlawful marriage, he has committed a transgression. But God does not decree that a man shall sin. Again, suppose a man robs another of money, steals from him, or cheats him, and then uttering a false oath, denies it. If we should say that God had destined that this sum would pass into the hands of the one and out of the possession of the other, God would be preordaining an act of inequity. Such, however, is not the case, but rather that all of men's actions, which are subject to his free will, undoubtedly either comply with or transgress God's commands, as was explained in chapter 2. The commands and prohibitions of the law refer only to those actions with regard to which man has absolute free choice to do or refrain from doing so. Moreover, to this faculty of the soul that we read about before, the fear of God or the reverence of God is subservient and is in consequence not predestined by God. But as we have explained, it is entirely in the power of the human free will. By the word all, hakol, the rabbis meant to designate only natural phenomena which are not influenced by the will of man, as whether a person is tall or short, whether it is rainy or dry, whether the air is pure or impure, and all the other things that happen in the world and which have no connection with man's conduct.
All right. Thank you. Gilad, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you? Too.
Good to have you with us. Okay. So, as we said, right, it's all everything in God's hands. Again, I don't like the idea of fear of God, but more of reverence of God is, except for the reverence of God. Right. So what Rambam is clarifying to us, because there was a misunderstanding, close to 1,000 years ago, and there's a misunderstanding still today, right? Which is like, the weather and health and nature, these are determined by God, right? But moral choices, which Rambam will also clarify even more, right? But moral choices like my faith or the kindness I have, that's really how kind I am. That's really up to us as individuals, right? And people just look at this as theft or harm, right? This is like or like he gives an example of someone betraying his wife, right? This is what God wants. God wants, and this, of course, is accusing God of a tremendous injustice, right? We can't have two of these things, and he has to distinguish between providence that has to do with nature, right? Again, and freedom and morality. And if someone stole money, it was really their decision, as he's saying. It's not God is telling him to take this money. And we see this also, of course, in the Kabbalah as well, whether it's you have the Olam HaTeva, right, which is the natural world, and you have Olam HaBchira, which is the moral world. And one's body and his environment is sort of destined, right? But the moral action I want to do is obviously I have that choice. Rav Dessler talks about this as Nekudat HaBchira, that there are many areas in life that are actually determined, but there are distinct areas in people's life where they have a struggle, and that's where like the freedom actually resides, and they have to have like this. It's like their moral mission, or at least that's how Rav Dessler sees it, with regards to that choice. Just also,
when you say area, do you mean moments of choice, or do you mean just fields
moments of choice?
Okay.
That's what he was calling Bchira.
I think that's
moments in your life that he's like sort of expanding on this idea of Rambam, which is saying like we have to accept that there's determinism in many aspects of our life, but there are these little points of tension where like that's where like your moment is to actually decide and choose and like create like sort of a new path, which again will have all its other areas that you have to control for, but there's still sort of like your own ratzon in those moments.
No, I think I would personally have an issue with that, and I think Iris Murdoch's critique of that view is especially relevant. I mean, this is in many ways the existentialist position, which says, right, you're always, if you read, for instance, Camus, Albert Camus, and the idea is sort of you have these moments where, let's say, you see this opportunity to do evil or good, and now you are sort of in this isolated space, and you can choose either way, and then you feel this moment of choice and you react to it. And Murdoch's critique of that is like, no one has any of that unless they have been, as she calls it, corrupted by philosophy. Like that's not something that you experience as a person. And if this I think relates to Hameuleh versus Moshe ben Nafsho. Mm-hmm. Like if you're at the point where you see a homeless person and you have this moment of choice whether to kick him or help him out, like focusing on that, and I think this is also Levinas's idea of the temptation to be tempted. Like if you're enamored with this, then you're not enamored with the good, right? Like this idea of that moment of choice, that freedom that you have to not be as virtuous or as good as you can be. So I think Murdoch's, I'll just finish the point. Murdoch's view, as she says, like the way in which we become good people is, you're generally automatic, but you sort of gently shift the way you pay attention to things, and over time that like generates a change, whether it's to the good or to the bad. But like you don't have that sort of, even in the most simple things, you could say, I know that the moral thing right now is to speak in front of this crowd confidently. That doesn't mean you have the ability to do it. The moral thing is to leave the house. Well, maybe you're clinically depressed and you can't bring yourself to do it, right? Like you're always affected by all of the past mental states that you have. So it's not so fast. It's not so momentary. And that's my objection.
Ben, sorry, you wanted to say something.
I guess I don't know. I can't really explain the Rambam's position on this, but I mean, if you just think about the Mesiyat Yesharim or Ramchal, and he brings the Talmud Torah mevil yadei zirut, right? That's what he says. He says that, right? And Talmud Torah, you can insert many. There's additions to what you can do that, right? You caring about a certain things enough to
create
to learn it,
to
learn it, right? It gets you to perceive the world differently. It gets you to react to the world differently. I like to give this. I like to mention this joke that Dave Chappelle has when I think about this, which is not 100% PC. So I'll tone it. But anyway, he says that he was looking for. He was in Walmart and he saw a Native American person, and he was like, "Really? Like, I don't like." He says like he wasn't sure. He wanted to test if he was really Native American, even if it was just like somebody that just looked like it. So he took a ball of, so he crumpled up. He was chewing gum, so he took the gum wrapper and he threw it on the ground. And the Native American guy, a tear came down his eye when he saw that. And then Dave Chappelle said, "Word, really? You are Native American? Okay, so let me ask you some questions. I read about you in school." So anyway, that's the point, is that for that person, right, that Native American, who is in his context, his culture is so embedded with appreciation for nature. He sees a gum wrapper fall on the floor and he immediately cries. Right? It's intuitive for him, or it's something that has been kind of ingrained, right? So I think that is right. You can slowly move towards those different reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think the Talmud also tells us the opposite, right? Like Rav Elazar Isha Mechoar tells us, you have Rav Elazar in his tower studying Torah, ומכיוון שלמד תורה הרבה, דעתו הייתה גסה עליו. Right? Yeah, go ahead.
Correct. You can't be just in your ivory tower or just like in this like theory land, right? Because you have to obviously, more than that, we see how Rav Shimon Bar Yochai gets chastised, right, when he comes out of his cave and starts burning people, and Hashem was like, "Bro, that's not how, like, I've created a world for people to exist in." right? So like, you coming out over here with like, this holier than thou sort of attitude is not really going to work. And we see this with Elijah as well, and other people that God says, like, you guys sort of have to be realistic. To your example about the person that's depressed, again, I think each person has this distinct area where the real freedom and struggle, that's where it resides. And that's their moral mission, right? Like, sort of like that guy that's in this depressed mode right now, it could be that there's many things that he couldn't control to get there. But then now that he's there, and like, that's his moment to be like, can I break free from this? Can I move from this? And it could be that in other areas in his life, he didn't have those decisions, right? Wasn't born to be even chemical, like I'm saying, neurologically, what's the word I'm looking for?
Prone to depression.
Prone for depression. But nevertheless, you could still break free. You could break free from that.
So I'm not saying you have, like, this isn't a claim for determinism that I'm making, in no way. I'm just saying that I found, reading Murdoch, I found that the notion of that choice being sort of immediate and isolated. Like when people talk about the like free will, right? In the debates like this, at any moment I can choose to do anything, and like that is just not.
I'm sorry. Then I misunderstood you. I agree completely. Correct. It's not this moment of like, today I'm doing this. And like Ben was saying, like you were saying, correct. It's more of like, there's these small little elements that if done right, you could shift your life towards like a certain way. And that's like, you of course are a part of this game as well, right? Out of all these pressures that are pushing this person called you are also an active character. And if you orient yourself well and are aware of that, you could have a greater effect on that motion, basically. I think so. First of all, thanks again for clarifying that. And yes, I agree with that. Okay, Namshich.
Yeah, that's me.
ואומנם עניין זה שביראהו חכמים שהציות והמרי אינם לא בגזרתו יתברך ולא בחפצו, כי אם ברצון האיש נמשכו בו אחר דברי ירמיה. והוא אומר, מפי עליון לא תצא הרעות והטוב. כלומר, אין האלוהים גוזר על האדם שיעשה הרעות ולא שיעשה הטובות. We don't have to get into this topic, but just to clarify, it's not saying that God doesn't create evil. It just means that he doesn't do the evil towards specific people necessarily. He doesn't do the good things towards specific people. וכיוון שכן הוא ראוי לו לאדם לבכות ולקונן על חטאיו לאחר שפשע בבחירתו. הוא שכתוב אחריו, מה יתלונן אדם חי גבר על חטאיו, וחזר ואמר שרפוי חולי זה בידינו הוא, כי כשם שמרנו בבחירתנו, כך עלינו לחזור בתשובה. לחזור בתשובה ולעזוב רשענו. הוא שכתוב אחריו, נחפשה דרכנו ונחקורה ונשובה עד השם. נשא לבבנו על כפיים אל בשמיים. אל על בשמיים.
Okay. In making this assertion that obedience or disobedience to the law of God does not depend upon the power or will of God, but solely upon that of man himself, the sages followed the dictum of Jeremiah, who said, out of the mouth of God there come neither the bad nor the good. By the words the bad, he meant vice, and by the good, virtue. And accordingly, he maintains that God does not preordain that any man should be vicious or virtuous. Since this is so, it behooves man to mourn and weep over the sins and transgressions he has committed, as he has sinned of his own free will in accordance with what the prophet says, wherefore should a living man mourn? Let every man mourn because of his sins. He continues then to tell us that the remedy for this disease is in our hands, for as our misdeeds were the results of our own free will, we have likewise the power to repent of our evil deeds. And so he goes on to say, let us search through and investigate our ways, and let us return to the Lord. Let us lift up our heart with our hands to God in the heavens.
Right. So Rambam is using the book of Lamentations over here and Jeremiah, right, to really again express that God is not forcing righteousness or sin on anyone, right? So, and we spoke about this also when we were talking about the nefesh in the earlier chapters, about how we can't have someone say like, "Oh, it's my angry nefesh that did this," right? Like it's one, because you have to take responsibility for the choices that you're making. And this is what Rambam is focusing on as well. And the verses he's using is to highlight, right, how blame shifting is like spiritually corrosive, right? Like it's the Torah's path is really clear, right? If you made a mistake, you regret, there's reflection, and there's a return. There's tshuva, there's repentance. And true tshuva, right, or true repentance only really begins when a person admits, at least this is how the Rambam qualifies it in Hilchot Tshuva, in his codex, which is, it was I, right, is the one who chose to do this, right, without free will, or at the very least believing in the idea of free will, right? Confession, or what we call in Hebrew is vidui, or fasting, what we do on the Day of Atonement on Yom Kippur, would obviously be meaningless, right? There's no point of doing all these things. And Ben, I mentioned I think last week how in as far as the Kabbalists are concerned, or say in the Zoharic language, you have a ketem benefesh, right? There's a blemish or a stain on the soul, and the tshuva, right? Repenting obviously is the light that that cleans it. We spoke about how there's a difference where Maimonides does believe that you could be severed, right? Like if you don't repent, like you have this nefesh that has this potential to return to God, but if you don't work on any of that, you can't reach your highest potential, right, and have your prophecy. But worse, if you don't repent, forget prophecy. If you're not just a good dude or you don't repent, you could be severed. Clearly, the Kabbalists, of course, believe that the soul is always connected to, ultimately, at some point, to the divine source. And that's why when you do a true moment of repentance, or let's say, if you examine your ways, or if you, today we'll call it, if you're doing deep introspection or going to therapy, we spoke about how you connect to the Hechalot Elohim, right? Like these divine chambers, meaning you are connecting back to your true source. And by doing that, you are actually rectifying yourself. Again, not what Maimonides specifically believes, right? He believes that you could sever yourself, but you, of course, need to repent and need to take responsibility, because it is you who has choice. And that's why it's you who has to take responsibility. And Rav Kook also believed that the idea of believing that tshuva is impossible, that repentance is impossible, is that horrible sickness that we have. We shouldn't give up and feel like there's nothing I can do. I can't actually change. And this is also what in some cases we call amalek, which is doubt, right? Which is this thing that makes you doubt in yourself, or doubt that things can't exist. We spoke about this in the past, how in a wedding, under the canopy, there's a couple getting married, but there's people in the background asking themselves, like, how long do you think this is going to last, right? And that's like shooting arrows of doubt towards this couple, this energy out there. So there's a sense also how you must believe also in yourself that you could actually do it. By all means, thoughts, ideas, complaints.
I think Maimonides is certainly taking a page out of the book of the Stoics here. Mm-hmm. When he's saying this verse, Maitonen Adam Chai Yavel Chatav, is the Stoic idea is like, you don't weep over being ill, and you don't weep over there being a tornado. You weep over failing to meet the requirements, the moral requirements on you, or like the Stoics say, the only good is the moral good. There is no, you shouldn't be wishing or praying, let's say, not to become ill, rather wishing to become the kind of person who can deal with whatever illness comes your way, or whatever events that are out of your control are going to transpire. So I feel that this is very much coming out of this part of the text.
I would say Judaism also stresses this idea of Nachum Ish Gamzu, right? This person that also said Gamzu Litova, right? That was his name, which is like anything that would happen, he would say, this too is for the good, right? So even like there's a famous story that he comes to a town to rest there, but it's late, and the town says basically there's no hotels, there's nothing available for you, so he has to go sleep in the field. And right, he had a candle, but the candle blew out. And he had a chicken, but this leopard or something ate the chicken, so he didn't have food. But every time this happened, he said, "This is for the best. This is for the best. This is for the best." That night, when he's sleeping in the darkness without any food, and like in the middle of the field, the city gets ransacked, and he wakes up and he says, "If I was in the city, I would have been killed. If I had my candle would have been lit, they would have seen me. And if the chicken would have made noise, they would have seen me." So really, it all worked out for the best. Now that's like, one way of looking at things, that even bad things that are happening, you have to sort of take it and, be able to sort of look at all the things that are happening to you sort of from like a very optimistic sort of point of view. I don't even know if you have to be walk around smiling. It's just realizing that like there are greater things in motion sort of around you. And it also could be like a different vantage point also, right? Which is not necessarily that this was good for you, but rather that if you could look at this from a different perspective, you could also see that there's value in these things, as well. So I'm also thinking, just with regard to the choices people make over here, it's your responsibility, of course, to repent. It's also your responsibility to like sort of, how are you looking at the world? I'm not telling people inviting them to live in denial necessarily, but there is a sense where you could have an outlook which is very pessimistic, and you're going to read certain things into your life as like things that are horrible to you, but you can also see them obviously as the silver lining in your life, and that could also change your outlook.
This reminds me of, and I agree with what people said. But in a maybe it's too simplistic, but this just makes me think about humility. Because when you say Gilad, you can't weep over being sick. You can weep over moral decisions that you can have somewhat control over, right? In a way, though,
I mean, the Stoics are saying it.
Not you. Right. So, but let's assume this is your position for now, or this is the Stoic position. So, but then we can kind of talk about, okay, yeah, but also, we know that if you take certain actions, then you can put yourself in a better physical position, so you can make moral decisions like not eating the cake. And that will put you in a better physical position, so you might not get sick. So it becomes it's like a matrix. It's like a matrix. It has so much complexity, and it's so interrelated that it's very hard for us to understand where the moral ends and the physical begins, in a sense. That I feel like there is a position. There's a position of humility there, for us to think, okay, like even if it's even if it's something that like if something bad happened to me, even if I think that I had no control over it, I can maybe still think about one way that I can gain some control over it or do something better, right? Because who knows what it would do. And this is what the smart people tell me to do, right? They tell me that I should seek a way to gain control over something, right? So for me, there's like that's kind of like the humility there. And even though I can't compute how much really control, ownership I can have over this thing that happened to me, I can still do something, and we'll see.
Yeah, I guess I want to respond to both of you on those things. I feel like I'll start with you, Ben. I generally resonate with like this idea of humility, and like you do what you feel is best. And when I say like the moral good, at least for me, not to speak specifically about the Stoics now, I do feel like it's not, let's say, purely virtue ethics per se, right? It's not like, you do what makes you a more virtuous person in a strict sense. Like the good is not that simplistic, but I feel like this relates to both of what you're saying. I feel like like both of your comments are kind of blurring some things that I would like to keep sharper, in a sense, because like it's true that there is moral good that would put you better positioned, but also there's a lot that you couldn't have done anything about, and like this thing about like everything is somehow for the good. To me, it's kind of I don't know. It blurs the line and the distinction that we have to sort of discern good from evil. Like when like that is not something that I think is livable within such a discernment.
Yeah. Agree. That's why I said that's why the important thing is humility. This is an anti-quantitative argument that I'm making in a
Yeah. No, and I resonate with the thing about humility. That's like shlach lachmecha, right? You don't know what the result of that is going to be. Like this is like generally a good thing that I feel like I'm doing, and the results are combinatorially explosive, right? Like you have no way of really computing the outcomes of your actions, especially over a longer period of time.
Right, but and I'll just say the last thing, but that's also, this is within the bounds. If this is okay to do, let's say it works, if you also don't assume that, don't take something that is clearly not in your control and you feel bad about it and it makes you depressed, like I could have done something, right? So your humility should also not get you to that place where you feel like for something that wasn't in your control, or there's uncertainty about it, or whatever, right? That's where you can get, that's why context matters here. Like there context specific situations are going to be easier to talk about specifically, but there's a general principle to apply here, and has vices on both ends.
I'll just say one thing and then I'll let Chezi also respond. So I just, maybe to clarify what I meant about the Stoic position, it's kind of like the idea is life is going to be full of those challenging moments where you need to be the most virtuous and effective that you can be, but like at some point, like you will have challenges that you do not have the capacity to overcome, and they say at this point all you can do is like live up to the best that you can be.
Mm-hmm.
And when that fails, but you've lived up to the best that you can be, then you have, in the sense that I think is resonating with the Rambam, you have nothing to weep over. And that's sort of what I was pointing to.
Well, I mean, Rambam will be, I mean, his prerequisites are pretty intense, right? I'm saying sometimes it's not even enough to like, if you're doing it because you want, like if there's any part of you that's like, because I want, right? You have to remove your ego from it. It has to be from like this really, really this pure space. And then you could really get to that place. But yes, correct. That's sort of, you wouldn't have anything to weep about if you're really ultimately trying your best. But I do want to point out that, and also clarify, Gamzu Tova in his name, that story, that's outlier, right? That's also his name. And that's sort of someone that like, that specifically he was known for sort of like that kind of outlook. And now what's special about him that he's doing it, like he's not doing it in retrospect, right? Before it even happened, he was saying that this is for the good, this is for the good. Now, I'm going to take an extreme example over here, which is, I'm trying to think if I could say it, but like I think it's for not for the shock value. It's not like we have
Another Game of Thrones reference, or
well, it's no. You have hit, and you also okay with Job's friends come and give him advice, right? And Rambam talks about how Eliphaz, the advice he gave Job was actually the correct advice, but it didn't matter because like Job was mourning. And Pirkei Avot also talks about, when right? Don't start consoling someone where the dead is right in front of him. They're not going to be able to like see like, oh, but he was such a good guy. Like I just lost someone right now. So there's a sense where when people are in it, you're right that's not an outlook that you could actually, that is practical, necessary to demand from someone. Like, so this is the more controversial thing. I'm not saying this is my belief. I'm just saying there's an idea out there that, the peak of, sort of like exile is, and the idea that connects to the Asara Harugei Malchut, the 10 martyrs, that sort of, there need to be like this horrible sort of death to move to like sort of this next stage, which would be like the Holocaust, right? So you could say like really Hitler, there's an element of him which allowed us to get to sort of this next stage. Now, that would be an insane comment to talk about anyone dealing with the Holocaust, because like Hitler is a horrible person and his name should be, erased. He should rot in hell. That doesn't mean that you can't look back, of course, from a bird's eye view and start looking and we're like, am I seeing this ultimately was for the good and this was for the good? Again, that's not a mindset you could demand someone have. And that I would say at that point, it's also detached from the individual. It's not really, we're not talking about free will anymore. We're just talking about sort of a general sort of plan that God has. So I just want to clarify, Ben, Gilad, on that interaction, on that idea. People shouldn't necessarily be walking around, and definitely not when they're in the situation of like, this is like, all for the good. This is not something that I think I'm thinking, let's say, our brothers and sisters that are in captive are thinking about, nor would I recommend them to be thinking about, what you should be doing, just think that this is all for the good. So I just want to clarify that's, if you're saying like, as far as blurring the lines also, to be clear that that's not like a mindset that I'm saying someone should adapt.
Yeah, but like the issue I have with that is like both what you're saying about the Holocaust and like about this war, where a lot more than I would like to have around. A lot of people are calling it Tkufa shel Nes Galui. They're calling it the best months of their lives since October 7th. The thing about that approach, and I think, and I'm not like, this isn't the first time I'm thinking about this. This is the first time I've encountered this, right? I'm saying like, to speak of the Holocaust and have like, even putting aside like the religion with the God, I think first of all that approach is, practically what drove so many people away from religion. This approach of somehow painting it as this is somehow for the good because of the divine plan, like the level of alienation that someone would have encountered, and that is to me nauseating to just think about. But the thing is, like, this isn't theory in the sense that that you're like talking about and no one would ever implement the pshat, right? Like this is something that is living within people, and I think is causing harm. Like this attitude and the way it's playing out, to look
or
at
the survival of our people for 2,000 years.
If that's how you want to look at it, and
not only it's not I want to look at it that way. There's just one way to look at it.
I guess what is the effect? I guess the question is, what is the effect of this belief create in people? How do they relate to the situation? So Gilad, if you're saying that by looking at the situation, it blurs the concept of good and evil for people, and then they they end up doing some things that should not be done, then that's a problem, right? So that means that something is not good with how they're viewing the world.
But that also relates to policy, specifically like to policy in the land, right? So like it's more like what Gilad would be saying. It's not just like ideas in theory, right? These ideas are shared with people that have political power, and that political power affects people's lives, of course.
Right.
Which is why America exists, right? Them believing in God, we could do our own thing, freedom. The whole story of the Exodus inspires these people to come create their own world.
I feel like you're kind of strawmanning my position and a bit hostile, because I'm not saying every idea that's religious has always done only bad for the world. Like that's not nowhere close. I'm saying
not saying that either.
Right? Like this attitude, I have seen it myself. I have been affected by it, and I feel that that's a notion, like a philosophical notion, that one must be much more careful with than we are. Like this, I feel like the Ten Chiyuch HaKol HaTova stickers are far more sinister than they are helpful.
I would say that attitude stems from, and you could say that's problematic, which is right? Even though the Messiah is not procrastinating, heaven forbid. He's forgetting the word right now.
Delayed.
He's delayed. I'm still waiting for him, and I look at that as like all this is for the good, as in like ultimately it will also be good. Again, you could say that kind of attitude also is dangerous. My claim was that attitude, I believe, is what kept the Jewish people. This is, of course, in the context of like, what we're doing and what we're studying. That's what kept them alive until this very day, is the attitude that we can survive, we will survive, it will be better. That's what kept like shtetls together, communities together. There are many, you could say, issues with that, but I look at that as the core belief of the Jewish people, that and again, you could say that's great, but once it comes to the land and now you have power, are you now using that in a sinister way? Maybe, but I'm just saying it's hard for me to look at that necessarily off the bat as sinister when I see it as so fundamental to bringing us to this point.
It sounds like we are both talking about the same thing, but with two different effects. And you're saying this has a negative effect and a positive effect, and those two things can stem from the same concept. So I don't know if you're disagreeing here. I do want to say something, that just to clarify something, and maybe this is also going to remind Chezi of something, because I don't remember exactly the distinction here, but I want to look more into it. But the story that you told actually happened to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva.
I think the story has to both. The Gemara.
Okay, maybe it happens to both, right? You have Nisim Gamzo, and you have Rabbi Akiva. Gamzo Letova, right? So Nisim Gamzo Letova is one way to look at things, right? To say, and maybe it's for things that you're not sure if they're good or bad, you can say Gamzo Letova, and then it will be good. But for things that are actually bad, like what happened to, let's assume it's Rabbi Akiva, right? I mean, he couldn't stay in the city. He couldn't study Torah. He didn't have any light. It was actually bad for him, but in a way, it saved him. So he didn't say Gamzo Letova. It was a different approach, which for some reason the Talmud makes distinct from Nisim Gamzo Letova. And I think that distinction might be helpful here. I don't know enough about articulating this distinction, so I was hoping that maybe somebody knows more, but there is a distinction here. Nisim Gamzo Letova and Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva obviously gets flayed by the Romans. So he got his whole story is captured like that. Like is this tragic story that is also related to this as well.
Okay, we've gone. We've diverged a little from the Rambam, but all with good intentions and also interesting stuff. Namshich.
Yeah. Here.
Yeah. Ben, if you want, at the end, remind me again just about like this thing about like people are looking at this as like, we're living like in miraculous times right now. I could share a thought about that. אמנם המאמר המפורסם בין הבריות, ואפשר למצוא מעין זה בשיחת החכמים, וכתוב בספרים שכמעט האדם בישיבתו וכל תנועותיו הן בחפץ השם יתברך ברצונו. הוא מאמר נכון, רק מצד ידוע, וזה כמי שהשליך אבן באוויר וירד למטה. אם אמרנו שבחפץ אלוהים ירד למטה, הרי זה מאמר נכון, הואיל ואלוהים חפץ שתהיה הארץ בכלליה במרכז, ולפי, like, as far as gravity, ולפי כך כאימת שהושלך חלק ממנה למעלה, סופו שיתנענוע למרכז. excuse me. וכן כל חלק מחלקי האש מתנוענע למעלה בחפץ שהיה, שתהיה האש מתנוענת למעלה, לא שאלוהים חפץ עתה, עם תנועת חלק זה מן הארץ, שיתנועע למטה.
Okay. As regards the theory generally accepted by people and likewise found in rabbinical and prophetical writings, that men's sitting and rising, and in fact all of his movements, are governed by the will and desire of God. It may be said that this is true only in one respect. Thus, for instance, when a stone is thrown into the air and falls to the ground, it is correct to say that the stone fell in accordance with the will of God. For it is true that God decreed that the earth and all that goes to make it up should be the center of attraction, so that when any part of it is thrown into the air, it is attracted back by the laws of gravity back to the center. Similarly, all the particles of fire ascend according to God's will, which preordained that fire should go upward. But it is wrong to suppose that when a certain part of the earth is thrown upward, God wills at that very moment that it should fall.
So this is, it's funny that you both added gravity here, which is, like, he's referring to Aristotelian theory.
Correct.
So it's like it goes towards the earth because earth goes to earth and fire goes up.
Yeah, but that's what they do then. We assume if Rambam was talking now, he would, like I'm saying, we're correct. We're ladun lekav zchut, the Rambam over here.
I'm not dissing the Rambam. That's not my point. I'm saying it's important to read it as it was intended, and the way, like, I think it enriches the reading to understand what this is coming from. This is Aristotelian theory, and this is the way that they perceived it. And I think it is interesting and also relevant to how we look at the world today, that this was also a very heated debate between Newton and Leibniz. That Newton claimed that sometimes God can perform miracles and intervene in the world, and Leibniz said that it is blasphemous of Newton to think that God is such a poor designer that he could not have designed the laws of nature and clockwork and everything to just bring about what needed to happen, even with the inclusion of free will. So
I believe the Rambam also will address that as well, as far as that, like, it's all those miracles already built in to the system, basically, right? So it's not that God needs to intervene; it's already from the right. So basically, there's again this he's tackling this misconception at the time, right? That there's. It's true that on a general level, that God is every individual action he's connecting to, because he created the whole simulation, the whole game, right? So all those natural laws, which now, like Ben is correctly mentioning, that this is Aristotelian physics, but in today's language, we would say because of the laws of gravity exist, right? Because now God is consistently deciding this path, right? He's not every day saying, I want. Now, there is that idea of mechadesh b'chol yom ma'aseh bereshit, right? Which is like there's an involvement of a flow of shefa from God. But again, this is sort of, you could again look at this from sort of the general level that God created the world, right? So the natural law sort of as a divine design, this is what the Rambam is really stressing over here, that he's not perpetually micromanaging every motion that's happening over here. And
it also sounds to me like he's just saying this is a too high a level. Like he can't just mention that level as something that affects, or it's too high for us to consider. Like it's not helpful, right? Like the God controls everything is true, right? God controls the gravity is true on one level, but it's not really applicable. It doesn't help us in this world make any kind of decisions or run any kind of perform any kind of guidelines or anything like that.
So correct. He's clarifying that yes, God controls everything, but you should not think that it means every individual thing. It means he creates the whole map, right? Which again connects to Hakol Tzafui V'Rashut Natuna, right? As in, like, I've created the whole map, and within the map there are certain freedoms that you have, but it's still within the rules of the game, right? Like I can't, in the Settlers of Catan, I can't leave the board. I could only play within the board itself. There's an idea that when after the flood, when Noah sacrifices, sort of in thanks to God, and there's the idea with the rainbow, and God uses this there's this idea of now things are going to be cyclical, which is God is saying, like, humans basically can't create a moral society, or you can't create any functional system if you don't even know how to look at time, or you're assuming at any moment the world's going to flood. And in that sense, from that point on, God is saying there's I'm not intervening anymore in a certain sense. Of course, you could come and say that already from the seventh day, God rests, right? And that's where there's no more interaction. But there's you could see in different places in Chazal where they sort of say that there's a retraction, so to speak, from God, where yes, he's involved, but he's really not involved anymore with the day-to-day. And that's also because it's necessary for humans to be able to have this sort of freedom to move around. And if God is involved, then, like Gilad said, it's also like sort of a flaw in the design, right? If you need to be involved sort of in that moment. Again, just as we always do from the Kabbalistic language, you're talking about over here, the God's will, right? God's ratzon, which is it's not chronological, but like ontological, sort of. It also precedes sort of time, and that's sort of the root of all being. So again, there's an initial intentionality, which the Kabbalists and the Rambam would agree about. The Kabbalists will say this goes through Seder Hishal Shalut, right? And this continues to flow through the world. Rambam will claim that, we just spoke about his claims, but again, there's this idea that there's this initial will that God is bringing in, and that is true on a general level, of course.
I would say that this is one of the passages that I think rightly, I heard this. I sent you, I think, this video where someone claimed like the Rambam is, in a sense, like the spiritual foundation for secularism, because this idea, right, that the day-to-day does not involve God's will at every moment, right? He says, "Lo she'Elohim chafetz ata." Right? That notion, like whether you, and this is, I think, again related to how philosophical ideas propagate. I think that you could have a philosophy that includes that and includes God, but at the core, what it means is like there are laws. These laws are something that you can intellectualize, and they don't involve like this is something that was sort of designed and put in place, and whether it was by God or by any other means, now like you can say this is just how the world works. And I think this is RJ also says that in the chat. And so to me, like that's even though this is still in the Aristotelian world, where like you would the rock wants to be at the center and the fire wants to be up. The fact that this is detached from God, that this is from God's will at every moment, I think is significant, especially compared to different views of that theological question.
It's a question of how it's you use the word detached, right? So that's really the question. How detached is it?
Are you asking, or?
Yeah, I'm saying, like, I'm sort of positing also the question, which is like what I said the rub is, which is like what level of detachment are you talking about, right? Is there, like I'm saying, on a general level, it's not detachment because God created, whether it be Aristotelian physics or the the laws that we know them today, it's still God, right? So in that sense, it's still His. Again, the Kabbalists will call it His will, right? I'm just putting out that term, but yes, it's as far as, but there's another sense where it's detached, right? Because there's sort of.
I'll try to clarify what I mean. This is from like Nishitani, and he discusses why the scientific revolution was so significant for the sciences, even if it's like technically it could be reconciled. He says like I think this is from Christian text, say that the sun shines on the good and the wicked alike.
Yeah.
That this notion of an agentic universe, like the sun chooses to shine over the wicked and the evil, like this like you should, I think in Christianity, like you should love even your enemies because that's how like the sun is very different from like the mechanistic view. God set these things in motion and now they're sort of indifferent, right? That, like, again, I'm not saying, like Cal was saying, like it's still God's will, you could still reconcile it. I'm not arguing that philosophically this is irreconcilable. I'm saying that psychologically this is a very different experience.
I mean, the Rambam will somehow, I don't know how he reconciles it, but he does. I mean, I would assume that he does, right? Because
but I'm not pointing again to the philosophical possibility of reconciliation. I'm talking about how that idea translates into the experience of people that changes dramatically the way they frame the world.
And Vadai Judaism, right? I'm saying the Rambam, obviously, like when he kicks in, like obviously he created like a big brouhaha in Judaism, right? Like people had a very hard time with this. And some would argue that, like, we've gone too rationalist in a certain sense. But Ben, as far as the reconciliation, like I said in the beginning, ultimately Rambam is going to say that, like, we can't really understand even what we're talking about. Right? Saying God's will or God knows, we can't know if there's even a contradiction because the terms themselves are problematic, right? So like he doesn't really give an answer. He of course believes, but even in the guide, he ultimately talks about standing on b'makom hasafek, being comfortable in this element of not knowing, which we spoke about in the prophecy chapter, which is Moses getting to this place of knowing that he doesn't know, right? And that's sort of his high level, and then he tries to bring that to the people with his veil, which is the experience is to realize our limitation, ultimately.
Right. So, I mean, at some point, I feel like what he's saying is at some point also these philosophical ideas or just saying everything is from God's will is like, it's not helping us touch grass, so to speak, right? It's like, it's too far removed. Like we can hold it as an axiom that we believe in, but it's just not enough, right? Lo b'shamayim. We need to make the decisions here. We need to figure out what happens. I don't know if this will be helpful, but it just reminds me of a family joke that sometimes I ask my wife a question, and she says, "It depends." Like it depends, and then my reaction is like, "I know it depends, but that's the way too. Like I know there's like a general principle, and it could go like this and go. I need like something more practical I can work with, right? So it depends. I really get mad when people give me that answer. But that's the joke, and I feel like the Rambam is basically saying, don't say that. That's like it's not really helpful for us to actually work on our musar. When we're talking about 8 chapters, we're going to talk about Pirkei Avot. We're going to need to bring it down and actually understand what we need to do. Yes. So that's kind of what makes me.
So to be fair to the Rambam, first off, this isn't his philosophical works. This is his moral works, right? And so the assumption is, right, he's going to tackle more of these things in the guide.
Right.
Here, this is the Hakdama to Pirkei Avot, right, which is all about these practical limitations. And we're right now still in the rubric of Naaseh v'Nishma, right? We're already embodying, and then we'll philosophize later. In the last chapter, Rambam is sort of throwing us a bone and saying, I will discuss these topics in a certain sense. But again, anyone looking at this, if you want to mean more about the Rambam, then you go to the guide really to talk about, to dive deep into these ideas. Mm-hmm. But here there's of course he's biased, and he's coming from his position. Now we're going to go deeper into him giving sort of proofs and explaining certain things. But even as we saw earlier, the mindset of if God knows, then what would be the point of the commandments? And you could be like, okay, what would be the point? Right? He doesn't go on and answer that. He'd be like, that would be ridiculous to claim. And so we sort of need to be accepting that, of course. Now we realize from the outside that there's obviously an issue over there, and he'll deal with that later on. So I'm saying, if you feel like he's not giving me my touch grass feeling, is because he just did that for the last 7 chapters, right? About not being angry, about being balanced, of all these things. This is just like a reminder of in case you got to this point and you need a reminder. This is what God, this is free will. So I think we should be. I'm backing him up over here if he's not being clear enough.
I mean, and I'm sure in the Rambam he reconciles it very nicely. But yeah, it's I got you. You have to.
We'll stop here. Ben, take care. We'll continue next week.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm staying with Gilad for a moment here. Oh no. Sorry, I thought I removed the text. I removed you. What was I going to say? Yeah, you mentioned that there's people today that are going around and saying that we're in miraculous times, relating to the Gamzu L'Tova sort of attitude we were talking about. So I would just mention that, again, from looking at things from, let's say, a Jewish perspective, if your barometer is for the miracle of Hanukkah, that was a huge big deal, right? And the sages at the time decided it was such a big deal that they're going to decide that it was because of God, and will even create a blessing which says because God commanded us. It's so some people say even that's the miracle of Hanukkah, which is not that the few fought the many, rather that the sages felt confident enough to say no, we recognize this as divine intervention. You could argue whether that's true or not, but the fact is there wasn't anything that God said we have in the Bible, or there's some sort of image. Just there were circumstances. There's this miracle that happened allegedly with the oil, which the rabbis also challenge and say we didn't even need this miracle, because there's plenty of reasons why they from a Jewish perspective, a legalistic perspective, didn't need that miracle. So why would that miracle happen even if they didn't need it? Rather to say that really the miracle was them getting to that point. Again, then I look at other data points of where Jews were in history, and the deaths we have, and the fights we have, and the pogroms, and you could do the whole gamut. So then if you look at that from that perspective, even with the horrible war we were in, again, if you're zooming out, it is a tremendous time. It's also a very perilous time. Like the map of the Middle East has changed, right? With regards to Syria and where Hezbollah is. And a lot of the enemies of the Jews, so to speak, are sort of on the run. And we're in this like standoff with Iran. And there was missiles flying, and we have a system that managed to protect the whole country. And the fact that like we even have time, like, it's nuts. It's horrible what's happening in Israel right now with how badly the government is functioning. It's almost miraculous that the country is still existing. Like we have issues right now with teachers and teachers striking, which is so nuts, which is like during a war with captives, you still have time to even think about like teachers and their strikes. So the Jewish people almost never had it this good, even with these problems, with like maybe King Solomon, but like the amount of having the land and being sovereign and all those things, and the amount of, you could add on to that, the amount of Torah learning that exists today in the world, and specifically in Israel. So from that perspective, it seems very, very miraculous to a lot of people. That doesn't, of course, mean, just like, by the way, just like 1948 was miraculous for many, many people, even though that's happening nothing like a few years right after the Holocaust. So you are correct for people to come and say, oh, the Holocaust happened because people decided to become secular, or the Holocaust has happened because Israel had to happen as well. And I'm mentioning again what I see in the comments of here. You're tired or sad, but just like I said, Rambam said that even if,
probably both, just to respond to the question.
Even if Rambam says about what the advice they were giving to Job, even if that's true, that it's miraculous time, you are correct, which is it has to be said carefully and with nuance and in the right context, and all those things have to be said. Like I said this example about the Holocaust here with these people, with prefacing that like this is pretty controversial, this is not something that people should be saying, right? Like no, like a leader shouldn't say something like that. I give an extreme example to point out that if you look from that perspective, I can understand why people would say we're living in miraculous times. That doesn't mean it's not horrible that we have captives. Of course, it's the reverse of that in a certain sense would be, isn't it horrible what's happening in Gaza? Horrible what's happening in Gaza. When are you allowed to compare it though to other wars and other battles and say like, but isn't it amazing that it's like still allegedly so precise and so less death compared to other battles and other wars? Now, it's just a point to say, what are you comparing it to when you say this is so awful?
Chezi, are you comparing it? I mean, I'm asking technically, like, have you looked at the numbers?
One second. Do you think the battle now and the rules of engagement are better than they were during World War II?
If we're comparing to World War II,
yeah,
that's better.
So are we as a society allowed to be happy about that?
You could also compare it to the Roman Empire. Yeah, the Romans.
Correct.
Why are we comparing to 2,000 years ago?
Because from a Jewish perspective, I'm looking at all my history, where we were and where we are. So even in a battle, my only point is that could be horrible, but there's also, even in battle, right? Even in the most just battle someone could have, forget Israel's battle right now, any battle you would have, you could come and say like, it's horrible that there's death, but then you could also accept that there's death and then realize, wow, it's great that there's so much less death than there could have been because of where we are as a society, where we are morally, where we are technologically, what we could do today. We, of course, keep on striving to do more and more and more of that. But I even look at the way, at least Israel claims that it is fighting this war, as that in itself is a data point for miraculous times. And I would assume you would want to see that, right?
I would want to see what?
If your country needs to battle, you'd want it to battle in the most moral way possible.
Sorry, I was just looking at the comments. Can you repeat?
If your country had to go into battle, you'd want it to fight in the most moral way possible.
Sure.
Right. So I'm saying, so from a bird's eye view, again, you could come and say, wow, how horrible the position we're in, that we have to be in this war right now. I'm so grateful that we're managing to do so in the most moral way possible, assuming that's what's happening.
I'm not assuming that's what's happening.
You're not what?
What?
You're saying I don't think that's happening, you're saying?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely quite a few data points at this point show that we are falling short of our own standards, even from our own wars several years ago, several years into the past. And I think like there are,
and that would be bad.
We will be right. What?
I'm saying, and if indeed, right, again, you could say we're falling short towards our own standards, and then again, let's say, are you comparing that to the rest of the world? And if it was true that we're falling short towards our standard, then that wouldn't be good. Then that would be, obviously, that would not be part of the miraculous time, and that would be a stain on what we're doing. I don't know yet.
But that's what I'm saying. I mean, the what happened with the ambulances.
What ambulances?
A month ago or something like that, there were several medical staffs and ambulances that, like, there's plenty of evidence they were shot by the IDF, and then like they buried the people and the ambulances with like a D9 after they were killed. Yeah.
Right. And again, horrible.
You've heard of this, or this is the first you're hearing?
I did not hear about this. Also, about a point of it is about God saying, what ambulance says it all? Does it? I need to know about every single thing that goes on. How much time should my life and family take?
You are, in this sense, like a typical person in Israel. Like, this is something that was talked about a lot more around the world than in Israel, and Israel hasn't. Like,
assuming it's true, for sure.
What the things that we know to be true and are like not seriously in contention, that there is enough evidence that are just like it's unreasonable to contest, are in themselves horrible. The things that I wouldn't like, I'm not even including the things that are speculative about. Like, there were some speculations that would have made it much worse. There wasn't enough evidence for me to say that could have been the case, right? Like, I could go back to previous instances. I could go to
then again, I would ask, all those could be true and they're horrible. Are they more than other battles? Are they more than other countries in these circumstances?
So like, this comparison has been done, and there are several criteria in which, yes, we are worse than others.
So and that's bad.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
and when those areas, I agree.
The thing that I'm trying to point to you right now is, I get it. You're busy. You want to believe like in this is as moral as it could be, but just the fact that the media is not reporting what's going on there, just like if you could look at the story with the ambulances, and you can ask yourself why the Israeli media is not reporting this at all, right? Why you knew nothing about it, and that in itself.
Alongside, I have to also weigh proper anti-Semitism, propaganda, all the other stuff that happened.
Weigh all of those things. I'm not talking about the bullshit propaganda that can come out of anywhere. But if you look at things just saying like they can't be right because of all the anti-Semitism, then by definition you won't be able to see when such atrocities do happen. And what 100%. I'm saying is, in this case specifically, it's not like, I'm telling you from everything that I've seen and read about it, that this is very hard to refute or to doubt.
That is horrible, and people involved should go to prison.
And they don't. And this is being
Very
covered
bad.
up. That's very bad.
Compared to other countries, other nations,
Look
all
at
the
you can, Chezi, if you want to say that this is not bad compared to other countries and other nations,
I'm not saying it's not bad.
No.
just saying,
if
I'm
you
not
want
gonna
to make that claim, I'm just saying you have to have the way to compare. Like if you're saying you don't know exactly, to the extent like giving a lower bound to how many uninvolved parties have been killed, to what atrocities have happened. If you're not involved in this and you're saying, I know my people, we're not as bad as other countries, and I'm saying like that's not a discussion you can seriously get into. You might be right, but like you got to do the work. And I've seen.
One second. So this goes back to, I can make that claim and I could rely on people out there, right? Generals, consultants, people that actually know this. Now you'd be like, but they're an authority. Maybe they're lying to you. Maybe they're lying to me. I could of course do the work myself on every one of these things, but I'm also assuming that they're taking my taxes. There's a lot of things I need to assume, right? To go around and believe these people. I'm driving my car. I'm assuming they tested it. So there's assumptions that are making. Of course, like you're claiming right now, there are issues. And in times of war, this is exactly when a government is going to do overreach, and the media is going to be biased. So all those things are true. Then I have to decide, okay, what story, right? Like I said, Young God says over here, what ambulance says it all? Do you know how many stories there are every day on every little thing? And it could be that there's 7 Arabs that got stabbed today and we don't know about it. And it could be other things we don't know about. You're right. So there's things I can't follow because I'm not even showed. There's things that I don't follow because they're not interesting to me or that I'm not even aware of. So it's also a question. So yes, I have my own biases. Aside from that, though, I have family in the army, multiple people in the family that I know who they are and how they act and the units they're in. And I ask them, what do you see? And do you see people acting a certain way? And besides one family member that I know, all of them were giving me one story. And these people that I trust and I love and I know, and then someone else told me something that was very, very disturbing. And I asked someone else, and he also corroborated that, like, yeah, that did happen over there. And that's like a very problematic group. And no one was arrested. And that's horrible. But then I also tell myself, okay, how much should I care about this? And I'm going to care about it as much as I should compared to what we should be caring about in battles, right? Which is, this goes back to a conversation we had about Bibi. There's corruption everywhere. So then we have to ask, like, what level of corruption do we actually go nuts about, right? Not everyone is a Nazi, because then the word doesn't mean anything. So is there a genocide? And if there isn't, we could use other terms, but we don't have to use that term anymore because it's not that. So even if it's horrible, and again, even from going back to the conversation from a miracle perspective, if you're weighing it on a balance, are we in a better place? I don't personally know. I can understand why people would come and say, maybe we are. And if maybe we are, then maybe it's a miraculous time. It would be silly to ignore what the bad things that are going on. And it would be worse to say those kind of things in the wrong place and in the wrong context, which it would be very insensitive.
2 things. One, I see that Yoav says that media did report it and the people involved were punished. I didn't see any evidence of them punished. So if you have like a link to that, just send it to me. And I definitely should be informed to the extent that I can. I heard that at most it was a slap on the wrist and no real impeachment, but I can definitely be convinced by evidence. Going back to our discussion of miraculous times and the things related to that, I think that's one thing that probably at the core of our differences to say that the founding of like the state of Israel is somehow worth it, like the Holocaust was worth it for what we have today.
I didn't say that though.
Well, So the idea to me that goes with Gamzu Letova is that, right? You go through that terrible thing that is, the closest we can get to pure evil, and then, well, anything compared to that would be better. But I'd say the state of Israel is, we would both agree, is not just better in comparison, it's better in comparison to 2,000 years of exile, right? Like it's very good. But to sort of view this as a part of the divinely ordained path, that this is, the tribulations that we had to endure, that all of these people, had to die for the divine plan. And I can't.
Did they had to die for the divine plan? I don't know if they had to die for the divine plan. There's many different timelines and divine plans that are possible. Of course, like we were talking about the Rambam, the way we act and our actions, of course, have to do with it, right? It didn't help that there were Jews living in Germany that were like in denial of, let's say, the rise of Nazism, right? Many people could have left and said like nothing's going to happen, right? So like it's not like you could obviously point at yourself and realize it's not like God put me here. Like I just didn't want to leave, right? I didn't believe in that, and also Israel was nothing at the time. I'm prefacing this is not shouldn't be taught in schools. What I'm saying right now, right? So I'm clarifying that like I'm having with you a discussion, which is like also how I see these things, or even a concept of Gamzu Tova. To fully explore this idea, like I mentioned, I alluded to the idea of Asara Rugei Malchut, this horrible. The Zohar, okay, the story, the famous story of Arba Nichnasu Pardes, right? The four who go into the Pardes. Okay, so the way it's written in the Talmud is one hitzitz v'met, one goes crazy, he becomes a heretic, and Rabbi Akiva nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom. He came in peace and he left in peace. Okay, the Zohar tells that story and says Rabbi Akiva nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'masrakot shel barzel. Okay, like we're saying he came in peace and he left in peace, but he has the most horrific death in the Talmud, right? So then there's a much deeper reading in that sense, which is it's a whole discussion about between Guf and Neshama, and do we want to separate these things, or do we want these things to be together? And there's an explanation about like these 10 Rugei Malchut are sort of, in a sense, again, you trust me that it's explained even more than this, but in essence, it's about how that sacrifice was necessary in order to allow sort of a demanding sort of the nation of Israel to be in Galut, in this physical thing, required like a protection from them. So it required sort of like a sacrifice. Not that those people were bad, but they required a sacrifice in order to like sort of to rectify this very materialistic existence that they're now in exile. And in that sense, the Holocaust would be the peak. Not that this had to happen, but once the conditions were what the conditions were, only something sort of that great that would symbolize sort of full wickedness and the example of like what full sort of what the Ubermensch idea, this materialistic idea, this denying of God, this rejection of the nefesh, required like a death like this in order to not only protect the people from exile, but remove them from exile completely. It required a complete reset in order for them to remove. Now, I disagree with this idea. I don't even fully understand it. Again, it's not something that should be taught. This is an idea that's out there, or if people are looking for it, is there, which for some people could give them a picture of how even this is for the good. Good doesn't mean, again, these concepts are difficult for us, but the good, the ultimate good of the divine plan, which we are still experiencing. We still mourn on Tisha B'Av, right? Nevertheless, we do think that God sort of is involved in that destruction because we sinned and things like that. We still mourn for it, though. We tell people when they die, if there's someone dies in their family, Baruch Dayan Emet, right? The blessing is, blessed he is the judge of truth, right? So we're accepting Gam Zula Tova because we trust the judge. However, we still command them to have 7 days of mourning. I'm not telling you now to go smiley. Obviously, I realize you have to deal with that. So I'm not trying to deny the death and how horrible it is. And I don't expect, and I also think it would be wrong for any Jew at that time living to have this mindset or to be taught this or to be thinking about this, because that would be, you can't demand that from people. From a bird's eye view, if I'm allowed to look at the 2,000 year or 4,000 year history of our people, I could make other discernments. I mean, again, I guess I'm trying for it not to sound horrible, but it seems like you feel like that sounds horrible.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around what you're saying. I'm not sure I get it ultimately. I'm not trying to say it like in sort of retaliation. I'm not trying to retaliate or something. I what you're saying. I'm just not.
I wouldn't presume as much either. I'll try to maybe write some of this down. Maybe it'll be easier for me. But I do agree that those ideas unleashed, right? Thinking that like now is the time because like it's this miraculous time. This means, okay, so an example would be, because I think we're in these miraculous times, I think the responsibility is on us to create the conditions where we can have peace with our Arab and Muslim brothers. I think it's on us to make sure that we create the conditions where, during exile there was an ideal to die in sanctifying God's name, right? Lamut LaKiddush Hashem. Today is Lichyot LaKiddush Hashem. We no longer need to die. So the fact that we're allowing soldiers to get hurt or things like that is horrible. Now we're supposed to fully be celebrating life. And the onus is on us right now to I agree that there is a feeling in definitely the sort of the Rav Kook world of how amazing it is. We're there. And this is something that Jacob knows about. He's saying like, it's the devil's work. Zionism's horrible. I agree that it's all great where we are, but we can't focus. It's great that we could talk about what happened 75 years ago. It's only worth it if we then constantly are working on what's wrong. And there's so much wrong in the country. And there's so much that still needs to happen. So that gives me, where we are, gives me the drive to be like, no, we need to do better. We have to do better. What's going on? There are people that look at it and be like, oh, now that we're here, this means, I'll use, let's say, Ben Gvir as an example. This is a perfect opportunity to remove, let's say, Arabs from the population, or decide to become more intense about certain things. Or now, because the country is weak right now, and I'm going to be doing other things from like a political point of view, and start manifesting ridiculous policies. Or really what the government is doing is, it seems like nothing on any front possible. Whether it's roads, whether it's taxes, whether it's teachers, whether it's healthcare, this insane, like, people have to understand, like, cutting teachers' salaries and at the same time raising the salary of the members of Knesset, right? Like on multiple levels. Like, A, they don't need more, but B, even if they did want more, like, is no one advising you on timing, when to even make these announcements? Like, it just seems like from every level, there's just people from the head until the people that are working for them. And that's why we are in desperate need, of course, for a new government and many new things in this country. But I feel even that the fact that we need to create a new government, the fact that we could have this conversation right now is miraculous. That is the win. Like this conversation is the dreams of people in the exile.
I guess maybe if I go back to the previous point, like you were saying about how like the Germans that could have left Germany. I don't think it's as simple, but let's say that they stayed because they were in denial that the Nazis would bring about what they brought. Don't you see like a similar conversation happening where they say, isn't it amazing that we can, despite the war, we can live in our ghetto and have, prayers and have our community. Gamzo letova, we are living, the best life. Like I have that sense of like, which is what I was pointing to before. Like there's a discernment there that has to be done. Like, is this letova in the sense that I should, see this as an indication that things are okay and I can focus on my family and things and carry on my life? Or is this an indication that the Nazis are going to put us in concentration camps and I can be grateful, throughout the whole thing? But if I don't have that point of discernment of saying like, this is probably not letova in a really practical sense, like they're making laws that will allow them to put us in concentration camps and in death camps.
Or at the very least, will prolong this perceived tova way down the line. I mean, I would argue that ultimately, but yes, you could say that like what you're saying is that can't you see that what's like again like I'm not living in this world, right? Right? You're not supposed to be like someone's about to kill me. This is also for the good, right? I would say like the idea of turning the other cheek. Obviously, we deny that idea that our Christian brothers have, which is like, no, I'm not supposed to just like allow myself to be run over. Now, and there's the whole idea of chanochet anar, right? You have to make sure you teach your kids so he could discern and be able to identify and see these things. So I am with you, and that when I say like, how can I be looking at all these things? My point wasn't that like I'm busy with my wife, so like, what do you want from me? It's as someone that is engaged and does look and have these conversations. Nevertheless, there is also like the life I'm literally living, right? Like I am also like living. So it's not like I have my scheduled call with my wife. It's just like we're talking right now, right? So or we're this right now. So like there's also the day itself, practically from a certain perspective. My point was about the evidence.
I'm not blaming you or anyone for not being conscious enough. I think, and I said this before, I think one of the biggest problems of our world in general today is that there is no address, there is no place you can go to figure out just the facts on the ground. Like the capability for governments and other interested parties to manipulate just like your awareness of like the bare bones facts is abysmal, and I think like that's a need that we cannot ignore. Like we need a way to get some basic knowledge that we can agree on, like that we can all understand. Okay, here's the facts that no one denies, and that's something that is not possible. And the there's always a story every day. The news cycles change too quickly is a part of that system. Right? It doesn't matter that there isn't anything especially important happening today. There's still going to be bonkers headlines that tell you that there's something really important going on now, and you'd have to dig pretty deep to understand that this is nothing. So you can't really understand what's something and what's nothing.
And this is happening at the same time where there's two huge wars, right? One guy's trying to get to Mars, Doge, tariffs, some guys claiming that there's aliens, It's just like Donald Trump was almost, there was 2 assassination attempts. That was like forever ago. Like don't even mention that. That's not news. When that that's clearly should be like the most, that should still be in the headlines in theory, right? If you looked at like what news was like back in the day. And you could say, and that's why, Chezi, right? Governments will take advantage of that fog to be able to, push things through, which I'm sure governments have done always. And I'm sure this is also the time for, mechonat haral, so to speak, like the poison machine of I don't know what you would call it, of the government. Is it the government or is it just the government? So the poison machine.
It's not really you close enough, let's say.
So they're doing 101 like a mind control, right? And like that's sort of like what's happening around us. So I agree with you. And then there's an onus on us, like, Chezi, if you really want to go around claiming like we're the best in the world, right? At the very least, do your homework, read, see if that's actually true. I accept that. I'm saying when I say that, I'm basing it on people I trust, right? And you could be like, that's a mistake, which I understand.
No, I'm not saying that's a mistake. I think that's the most reliable baseline. I think that's like that. I'm saying the opposite of that's a mistake. I'm saying when you look at a sample and you don't know how biased your sample is, don't overread into it.
So, sorry, I was going through those too quickly. So the most reliable source I have, you said, where can I go back and like find that truth? The most reliable source I have is my operating system, which is the Torah. And then I also look at, again, like I said, the history of my people. And that is one thing that I can look back to and try to either read into, try to use that to map out what's happening, try to track a pattern over there. And of course, you'll be like we can't deny that I have mixed in there the idea that the prophecy is real, revelation happened, and that's something that exists, right? So like it's sort of not fair for me to use those tools, but like those are the tools that like I feel like I'm allowed to use in the world that I'm looking at. And when I use those tools, then it is possible for me then to paint that picture. Again, like I made like a lot of caveats and like why I think like I agree with many of the points that you're saying. And I understand why this also potentially drives you nuts, like the conversation we were having last week, which is like, but 1 second, and the nuance and how do I know and compare it to other people? Because like I'm trying to be as fair as I can to myself. I also understand the place you're coming from, but before I start to fully challenge sort of the way I'm looking at the world, I guess I need to feel like this real, and in a certain sense, I already feel it. I didn't finish my sentence, which is like, I really can't know what's true anymore. And it's getting to that point where like, I really can't know what's true anymore. And even that's why, again, the conversation can be frustrating because like it's sort of me saying like, I hear what you're saying. That's what I still think. I'm still in this place where like, I have enough to still quote unquote lean on. And maybe you could be like, well, you're comfortable to lean on that. Maybe that's even true that I'm still comfortable to lean on, but there's still enough there for me to lean on where I'm like, okay, I'm still there. Now you could be like pointing out like, but look at this and look at this and look at this and look at this. It needs to get to a critical mass. And you can be like, I don't understand how it didn't get there. Like, why is it not at that critical mass where you're like, no, like, this is still horrible. And maybe it's because I'm being clouded by the propaganda that the poison machine is sending out. Enough truth and enough propaganda to muddy the waters enough to make sure I can't change my mind. But I always tell you this, though, that the things I've listed right now that have nothing to do with the judicial reform or the hostages, just the way they're completely fumbling everything to do with running a country, besides those two elements, right? Like I'm give you all the runway you need on the war, and the hostages. It's complicated. The pressures, the world. You know what? No problem. I have zero complaints. You're messing up on everything else. Just that is enough to bring people to the streets. But that's just not the angle I keep on saying. That's not the angle that's pushed. The angle that's pushed is where there's so much fog. And that's why it's very hard for people to be like, oh, it's clear. Oh, it's clear, or it's clear. There is no fog about them asking for more money. Like them raising the prices. There's no fog. There's no fog about like there's PTSD. It's rise by like I think like 14% in Israel, and like there's so many soldiers that are not getting like the medication they need. There's no argument. Bring them down on that. Demand a new government because of that.
I mean, I agree. That's all bad. Have you watched? I know we need to finish the. Have you watched the videos?
I see. 1 second. Jacob has a thing. How long ago did he send that? Oh, a few minutes ago. Okay, so we'll get off in a second. Yeah, sorry, please.
I'm asking. So just to give context to the listeners. Okay, I'm looking at the comments.
Sorry. I'm trying to be friendly to people, but go ahead.
So for context, there was a mob attacking the people who were watching the alternative memorial ceremony on Remembrance Day in Israel. And I had sent you an article about it, which we discussed and had a lot of disagreements. Have you watched the video of of those attacks at the
horrible animals? It's a huge disgrace. It's disgracing God's name. It's a huge chilul Hashem. Bad on all levels, on a national level, on an optics level, on a solidarity level, on a religious level. Horrible. And an indication of, again, like obviously the pressures of war, which is just general on everyone, but then exacerbated by rhetoric, and you could even say exacerbated by twisted ideologies that include ones of Gamzulu Tova or this is the promised land and all those things. So you're 100% right. That could fuel misguided ideologies alongside war and like grief, alongside pulp leaders that are coming saying reckless stuff, could definitely lead to horrible things. And that should be called out. And you are right that it's horrible, where again, the fact that it happened is very bad, but I could be like, these are extremists. The fact that I don't see it, and maybe I didn't do my homework, but I don't see like many people in let's say many rabbinical leaders coming out and saying that this is antithetical to the Torah and its values and it's horrible. That is horrible. That's to me is almost worse. It's because humans are horrible. I mean, humans can be very problematic, and I'm even dismissing the people that are doing it because who knows, maybe they lost a family member and they're like super full of grief right now. I'm being sympathetic to that too. I'm not excusing their behavior. I'm just saying, let's say their mindset was in a place like that. Nevertheless, still the rabbis should come out and be say, again, obviously the political leaders and things like that, vadai, but the rabbis should be coming out and saying that this is horrible. They didn't do so, which is very bad. And clarify also our disagreement. I ultimately believe that when indeed we can have a Memorial Day that includes the Palestinians as well, or Arabs as well, I think there'll be a very holy day when we can all do so and understand that we're made in God's image and we have a shared destiny. But we're clearly not there yet.
I just wanted to say in that regard, and I tried to say it in our messages, when push comes to shove, when there's literally, a lynch mob outside of a ceremony that I could have easily attended, like, this is when, to me, the chips have fallen. Right? I told you many times that I think this is how it will look, and I think this is how it's looking. Right? When the violence takes on its most direct, naked, physical form. Like, where's the part where, you and the people who are on the opposite side, who think these ceremonies are, terrible ideas, and that all these people are causing us damage, where do they get up and say, regardless, we're going to stand with you because we can't have you feeling unsafe from attack by, your, what we call your brothers. And to me, like, that's where the rubber hits the road. So, and I don't see it. I don't see it.
I can tell you that, like, for example, it's hard because I'm trying to think of like a practical example. If
have you brought it up in your synagogue? Have you said, I've seen this thing?
Yeah.
I want them to be aware of this, and we have to make sure that anyone in our lives that this could have been relevant to knows that we will be there to stop this.
Okay, so we will, again, the practical version of we will be there to stop this, because you asked, like, when would I come out, like, sort of on the streets and, like, defend you? Like, I'm just giving an example. Let's say I'm giving two examples, yours and another one.
We have like just 4 minutes.
There's a gay parade happening in Jerusalem, let's say, okay? I could come and say I'm against the gay parade happening in Jerusalem. If I was walking down the street there and I saw some sort of like crazy person, whether he's Orthodox or not, rush like the people and start like beating them up, I'd 100% get in the middle of that and try to stop them, as I have many times in the past, unfortunately, be involved in altercations like this. If I was there, not only would I stand, I'm assuming you were there, not only would I stand with you, I would call those people out. The problem is, like, you don't know, like, if you came and told me, Chezi, something's happening and I need you to come over here, then I would do so without a problem, without hesitation, and invite, if you felt like you're in danger, invite people I know to protect you as well. Now, you can come and say, like another example.
Yoav Basla just responded, no, I do not stand with you, brother. I think that's the phrasing.
What are you talking about? Oh, referring to you and, about standing with brothers?
No,
I could decide not to. That's a separate discussion.
We have to finish anyway.
Sorry.
But that's generally, I think, a good point to end on.
Catch you later, dude. We'll talk.
All right.
I'm sure Jacob's loving this. Like, look at this, like these two Zionists fighting. You could just see that, like, Zionism is like a failed idea. But no, this is what's so beautiful about these beautiful conversations. First of all, yep, Yaakov Mugatu, I love you and I know you. I would say, as I get off, that it's good. It's good that all this noise is happening, because it allows the focus, the Ayar Saron is not on these conversations with Gilad. And these conversations will allow for something new to grow. So again, it's a completely failed idea. So sad that he sees it that way. But again, I think we, in a sense, see it similarly, where I say, correct, where we are right now is far, far from where we're supposed to be. So its current iteration is still failed. And until it gets to where it's supposed to be, it's always failing. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Don't worry. It allows us to rid ourselves of the Avodah Zarah of Zionism. Correct. You are correct that we are also going to have to shell the secular idea of Zionism, and maybe even has to have a different name, right? We talk about our name eventually changing from Israel to Yeshurun. Nevertheless, it needs to happen in this land, and it will emerge from something that's happening over here. So even Zionism is too for the good. As I tell Jacob all the time, and as Solomon tells us in Song of Songs, God is knocking on the door. For the date with the best looking girl in town, I am going to be early. I will not be late. Catch you guys later.